what are some of the subject areas that you're covering? I mean, for example, the Concord Coalition, we're very interested in fiscal policy, debt deficits, entitlement reform, things of that nature. What are some of the questions that you're asking your focus group participants in this swing voter project?
So we're generally asking about things that are hot at the moment. We're trying to understand both politics and policy. This year actually is a bit more focused on policy because this is what you might consider a quote governing year, because we don't have a midterm election this year or a presidential election. So we spent a lot of time looking at things like infrastructure, for example, and what people are willing to accept or not accept in an infrastructure package. And what we've been finding is that, generally speaking, they're supportive of what President Biden wants to do on infrastructure. They're at least somewhat familiar with it. They recognize that it's expensive. They do not want to borrow money to pay for it. That is basically hard and fast. They do not want to go into more debt in order to pay for infrastructure. And generally, they're comfortable soaking the rich, to have wealthy corporations and wealthy individuals pay for the infrastructure. The other thing is that, well, in broad strokes, they know what's in it. The specifics really kind of elude them. And what we did in one focus group back in May is that we took a giant pie chart that the New York Times had put together, actually a phenomenal chart that looks at all of the subcategories in both the jobs plan and the family plan. And it basically says how much money is being spent on each of these categories. And we showed people each of them one at a time. And I got the sense that most of these things are items that these swing voters value. They'd like to have them. The issue is how much more debt that they want the country to go into to pay for them. And the answer really is not at all.
I guess that's encouraging. I mean, does that transcend into why they're worried about the debt? I mean, do they think about it in generational terms, or do they think about it as a bad thing economically, or is gut instinct? What is the concern about debt?
So Bob, the thing to think about is that we're not talking about policy experts here, right? So I would say it's a fairly superficial understanding of what the debt means. But I asked about it actually the other night. I did focus groups on June 8th. And I asked about the concern about the debt, and I heard things like, well, how are we going to pay back all this money? That's a concern. I had one woman say she was concerned that there wouldn't be enough money for Social Security, and she was older. I guess I had to look up her exact age, but my guess is in her late 50s or early 60s. So she was concerned about the future of Social Security. There's a concern about needing to raise taxes to pay the bills because we're incurring all this debt. What is that going to mean? And how is that going to affect me personally? And there was a desire to cut back some of the infrastructure plans that Biden has. One person called it pie in the sky. It was just so much spending that he thought it was unreasonable, and half of it should be cut back. So the thing I would say, and sort of the theme that comes out most often, is the degree to which people personalize this. The way they look at a huge credit card expense that they have to carry. How am I going to pay for it? Where am I going to come up with the money? Is this going to cost me more somewhere else? How do I deal with it? Are benefits going to get cut? So it's not to over dramatize it, but there's very much a me mindset to this. This isn't sort of a long-term concern about generational equity or the future of America. It's more about how does this affect me personally?
No, I think that's an interesting thought, because I know that one of the things that we constantly try to wordsmith is how to get everyday voters to care about debt and deficits, and it's how do you personalize numbers, that you have a hard time relating to them on a daily basis and how they affect your daily activities. And the numbers are so big as well. It's how do you make those real to John Q. Public when you're talking trillions of dollars. So it sounds like that there's an avenue, if you will, for organizations like the Concord Coalition to talk about debt and deficits, as long as there are ways that we can personalize it and how it affects voters in their lives in terms of national, as you were saying, future tax increases and perhaps an impact on interest rates and how that affects credit card debt, mortgage rates, how much home you could buy, et cetera.
That's exactly it, Tori, is that personalizing it is the key. Because otherwise you're talking about numbers that are unfathomable, right? Trillions of dollars, you're talking about millions times millions. most people have a hard time envisioning anything really above the value of their own home, right? Is for most people a six-figure sum. So to talk about trillions of dollars, I'm not sure how people handle it. And also people tend to misstate it. You know, I had one guy the other night in the focus group talked about $400 trillion. I don't know what he was talking about. I think maybe he meant 400 billion, 400 trillion, but the B and the T become almost interchangeable. And obviously that's not right. One's 1,000 times more than the other, but for lay people, they're just huge number and even huger number. And I think we just have to be mindful of that it's hard for people to conceive of the true size of these amounts.